Good morning, y'all. We're just waiting for a couple more people.
I'm still sharing the first slide, right?
Yep. Okay, what do we got here? Why don't we open it up?
Open one up.
Start it. Let's start
Okay.
it.
All right.
Shannon, do you have to start the, yeah, you're recording. Okay.
Yep.
So good morning, everybody. I hope you're all well and had a great weekend. Spring is finally here, it looks like. So that's a nice thing. It was nice to see the sunshine. I'm Andrea White. This is Shannon Quinn. And we are here today to talk a little bit about hotels. We want to talk about hotels because one of the things is a lot of the hotels will be closing soon and the window is closing. But one of the things that we wanted to talk to you about is how to set up the hotels so we're prepping people for housing and we're using that time to be the most productive as possible. And a lot of these techniques will also can be applied in shelters if that's where people are going to be. So let's think about that. So one of the things that we're going to do is talk about hotels. If you could turn your camera on as much as you can, that would be great. Please put your first and last names in as your screen name or put them in the chat box. If you sign into the chat box with your first and last name and your agency name, that would be really helpful. And that actually functions as our attendance sheet. We're going to upload the slides, handouts, and evaluation to the chat box. They will also be available to you. And we can also email them to you, whichever works best. And just remember, we love interactions. Raise your hand, indicate in the chat box you'd like to comment, or just unmute and talk. The other thing is we are recording this, so just be aware. Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Great, perfect. Okay, let's go to the next one. So one of the things that we would like to do is for people to go around and just say what your name is and where you're from. And then we're going to talk a little bit about case management in hotels, structuring the intervention, tasks and focus, and we're going to do some wrap-ups and questions. If there's anything in particular you want to mention about hotels, please feel free to do this at any point, but it'd be helpful to do it now so we can gear the presentation to the things that actually concern you. We're aware that some people, their hotels are closing, and if that's the case for you, if you could give a time frame, that'd be really helpful. So why don't we just go around this? I hate it when people say go around the virtual room, but I don't know what else to say. So if we can just go around and talk about that, that would be great. So why don't we start with, I don't know if everybody has the same list. Is everybody of the same order in participants, Shannon?
I don't think other people have a participant list. I
Okay,
think it's just us, the host and the co-host.
okay. So anybody want to start?
You all should be able to unmute yourselves. Go ahead.
Perfect.
I'll start. My name is Myra Cabanas. I just started with
Hi, Myra.
BH Care February 1st.
Ah,
I'm a newbie.
okay. Do you have hotels
Welcome.
that you're using? Do
I'm sorry?
you have hotels that you're using?
No, I'm still in training mode, so I still
Okay.
haven't been really out there in the field.
Okay.
What's the-
Kyle,
Yes.
go ahead.
Go ahead. What?
Talk about what your name is, where you work.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I just got into the meeting late. I was dealing with
It's
something.
okay. It's okay.
My name is Kyle Young. I'm an outreach and engagement case manager at Liberty Community Services at the Liberty State Haven site.
Great.
We have a next step resource program that we operate, and I just love doing what I'm doing, helping the people.
It's great. Welcome to the training.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lori, you want to say something? You got to unmute. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I'll go next. Hi, guys. Lori Walling, Center for Human Development. I'm the PATH
Hi.
worker here.
Great.
Excuse me, I have allergies too. Our hotel, the Marriott that we're using, is closing at the end of the month.
Okay. Go ahead. I have a 401 number.
That's Anna Whalen and Katrina Frank for Perception Programs. Our computer won't let us do it on the screen, so.
Ah, okay. Or do you have hotels and when are they closing?
Nope, we don't have anything like that.
Okay, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name
Yep.
is Vera Clark. I work for the Friendship Service Center in New Britain. I am the PATH case manager, and I think that the hotels that we are using in Central will be closing the 31st of March.
Okay, so it's soon. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
great. So Will,
Hi, good morning. Will Carpenter. I oversee our PATH program in Middletown, and we are currently working with clients at the Wesley Inn in Middletown, but that is also closing on the 31st of March.
okay, great. Thanks, Will.
Hey, I'm
Rob?
Rob Lockhart. I'm the Director
Rob.
of Program Services here in Stamford, Connecticut. We are in 2 hotels and they are closing. First of which is closing at the end of this month. And then we're consolidating rooms over in one of the hotels and then reopening our shelter to move people back in. So we have kind of a limited capacity of rooms that we'll have going into April. But we're taking the opportunity for everyone we brought in through PATH and through our outreach efforts to really try to get them as connected as possible. They would be the first
Great.
moving over to our shelter. So it'll be interesting to see how many people will come over from the hotel to the shelter. But we're in a newly renovated shelter, so it should be an easy transition. But I'm afraid we may lose some people who don't necessarily want to come into the shelter.
Yeah, absolutely. And transitions are hard, no matter how smooth we
Yeah,
try to make
and
them,
we-
right?
It was great, though. I gotta say, we capitalized as much as we could on this opportunity with getting our very hard to reach homeless people in during the winter time during COVID. So we were able to start working on the IDs and the other documentation,
Great.
and even
Perfect.
just to get them in a better spot so that we can get them housed.
Yep.
Yep.
That's great. Alexis, I'm just going down the list that I've got on my thing.
Right?
Alexis, can you, hi?
Hi, good morning. My name is Alexis
Just-
Ray. I'm Path Case Manager. Can you hear me?
Yep,
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm a Path Case Manager in Columbus House. And the hotel is closing on the 31st.
okay. Zanetta? Is that how you pronounce it?
Zanetta,
Help me. Zanetta.
thank
Beautiful.
you. Zanetta Sasser, Program Director with CHR. I oversee the PATH program in out in Greater Hartford. Our hotel, we do have one hotel and it's closing on March 31st as well.
Okay. How about Katrina? You gotta unmute. Okay, let's move to Elizabeth.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Zielik. I'm the Outreach and Engagement Coordinator for Bethel. And our moteling of clients will be ending on the 31st.
Okay. Great.
Hello, I'm April.
Hebe? Go ahead.
Hello, I'm
Go
April
ahead.
Maitland. I'm the Program Coordinator from FSC, working with PATH.
Great.
I've got an antenna now. It's just not worth
Mary Ann? I hear you. I hear you. I don't know if you're talking to us.
Yeah, so this is Katrina Frank. Our
Hi,
computer
Katrina.
has also as the 401 number because our audio nor camera works on agency devices.
Okay. How about Elizabeth? Oh, no, Elizabeth just went. Hebe? Hebe? Is that how you say it?
This is the
Yeah.
webinar.
Yes. Sorry, my camera is not working today. So I'm Eve Kudish from Columbus House. For the region of MMW, the Wesleyan Inn Warming Center is closing on March 31st. But for
Okay.
the region, we have the Red Roof Inn that is not run by Columbus House, but the Red Roof Inn will continue be opening after March 31st.
Great. Did you guys buy it?
No, no.
Great. I have Kyle. Let's see who else. Elizabeth, Bobby Joe.
Yeah, Bobby Joe.
Hey, Bobby Joe.
Hello, I am Bobby Joe. I am the Housing and Outreach Program Manager for BH Care. We're in Ansonia and Branford, and I oversee the PATH and Outreach program here.
Great.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Lisbeth De La Cruz. I work at Columbus House overseeing the Outreach and Engagement Project, as well as PATH.
Great.
Our hotel is also closing in New Haven. We have a cold weather bed program and an overflow shelter also at the hotel, and that will be closing.
Great.
And one more thing, Andrew, I'm sorry, is the Warming Center in Hamden also, we are running that, and it's closing March 31st.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't know, y'all. You know, I lived in Connecticut for a long time, and I do remember snow in May sometimes. So I'm hoping it doesn't get cold again for these guys. So what they tell us is going to be hot this summer. So, and that summer's going to start in April. So we'll see. Noel?
Or Noel?
Noel?
Yeah, good morning. This is Noel Ortiz. I work for Liberty Community Services.
Great.
That's basically it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks. Letitia?
Good morning. This is Letitia Johnson. I'm the PATH Homeless Outreach Case Manager for BH Care.
Great. Cara? Cara, hi. Okay. She may be pulled out. Everybody knows Kara, right?
Hi, sorry.
You're good.
Kara, DOH, oversee the ESG
Yeah.
outreach project, which is brand new. Just here to listen in and get some Andrea White words of wisdom.
Thanks, Kara. I have a V Clark.
That's Vera. She spoke already.
Vera, okay, perfect. Did we miss anybody?
I don't think so, but feel free to speak up if you haven't spoken
Absolutely.
yet.
All right, let's talk a little bit about case management in hotels. And what we want to remember is that hotels are a little easier to implement this, but we want this applied to shelters as well. And one of the things that really strikes me is that we've been working with shelters on and off, and we've been teaching them these techniques. And one of the things that we found when we did the rapid rehousing pilot is there's a significant difference when some of these housing skills are taught in shelters. They didn't have hotels at that point, but there's a significant difference in how well people do in rapid rehousing. And in all my own personal, we ran shelters like this a lot. And one of the things is it made a huge difference in supportive housing. So if we're thinking about people moving out and then staying housed, we want to think about these things. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to facilitate people's transition to the hotels. And you hear a lot about choice, right? It's a key part of housing first. It's a key part of everything. But when people decide to be someplace and they go through the process to decide, they're more likely to stay there and they're more likely to participate in what the place offers. So part of the facilitating the transfer to the hotels and getting people into hotels, somebody mentioned that the people who are most difficult, who are most high acuity, were the ones that they prioritize for hotels. We want to tell them a little bit about what the expectations are and what's available in hotels and how this is different from where they are now. So for instance, most hotels have some sort of residential teams or residential staff that largely come from your local shelters and can provide some services. We want to orient people to that team. We want to orient them to our role. We want to orient them to what the expectations are in hotels. And most importantly, this is also true with shelters. Most importantly, we want to talk to them about how this builds housing skills and tenancy skills. How these expectations in the hotels are much like what the expectations are in housing, whatever housing they decide. So we also want to develop the relationship. And I know PATH really specializes in developing the relationship when we're doing a lot of that, but we have to be aware that the relationship changes when people are in different places, from streets to the shelters to, shelters to hotels or streets to hotels. The relationship is going to change. So we want to redevelop the relationship, and we want to really be clear about what our role is and what is the function of the program they're participating in. We want to help them, because if people move into hotels and they can just follow all the rules and be fine, that's pretty unusual. Usually people take time to reorient themselves, to think about what their role is in the hotels. So we want to help people stabilize and help people follow the structure of the hotel. We're going to do some assessment and planning for housing and exit from the hotel, and that should always be our focus. And then we're going to secure needed documents and financial resources that Rob talked about. Okay, so let's go to the next one, Shannon. So think about what information people are given when they're selected for hotel placement. Are there clear expectations for choice? These are the reasons why you might make it a choice. There's things like availability of showers, washing machines, either shared rooms or private rooms, the food stuff, all of this stuff, all the concrete stuff, but also what are the expectations of the hotel? So this is a hotel that, much like housing, you can't bring somebody in with you. However, you can have visitors, and let's talk about how we do that. what are the services in the hotel? What are the expectations for tasks and contacts? And I want to talk about that a little bit. And how long will they stay? But I want to pause here for people to get a chance to speak up about what are people told when they're moving into hotels, or they've been selected for hotels, and how do they make that choice? Or you know what, it may be easier to talk about why are people willing to move into hotels?
You can talk by unmuting yourself, or you could put it in the chat if you like.
Yep, absolutely.
They go into hotels for various reasons. One, they're homeless, and two, they have nowhere else to go. They can't go with families, they can't go with friends. So given the opportunity for a cold weather event, they go to the hotel.
Okay, so this is the ability to stay out of the cold weather. Do you tell me who's talking? I'm sorry.
Vera.
Vera. So Vera, are people willing to go to shelters for the same reason?
No.
Okay, so what's the difference here?
The difference is the hotel and the shelter.
Okay, but talk about that. Why would people be willing to go to hotels and not shelters?
They have a place to stay. They have a little more freedom in the hotel. In the shelter, they have to abide by rules.
Okay, but in hotels, they have to abide by rules too.
Yeah, they appear to be a little more laxed.
Okay, so would you say that the hotel rules are similar to what the rules are in housing?
Absolutely.
Okay, we want to make that connection for people. Okay, we want to talk to them about why they were willing to go to hotels, and we want to talk to them about what the connection is with housing, right? Because part of our job is not just to place people in hotels, but place them in housing. So we want to talk about that connection. So that, for one thing, the rules are clear, right? People get more freedom or independence in hotels, right? There's a lot of not directly observed time, which is one of the reasons why people are usually willing to go to hotels. In shelters, it's open, so people can see you do whatever you're doing. In hotels, it's a little more private, right? So yes. Privacy is something they may want. They may feel safer in hotels. These are all connections to housing, so we want to talk to people about that. Those are great reasons, Vera. Anybody else have reasons why people are selecting hotels?
Couples. Sometimes they can go in as a couple.
Yes.
And stay together.
Okay. So that's really important, right? And that has some direct links to housing. Can they live together as a couple in housing?
Yes.
Right. And they can also get a subsidy as a couple if one of the people is head of household, or if both people are eligible for the housing and they decide to do shared housing, which is available through most subsidies. So that's something we want to talk to people about. So this is a clue about what they would get out of housing, right? It's a way to talk about housing. So what else? What are the other reasons? Couples is a good reason. Pets?
Not necessarily, because some hotels don't allow pets unless they're for therapy or a special needs.
Okay, but that's something we can teach somebody, right? So the reason that you got a pet here is because we could document the fact that they were either companion animals or they were therapy animals or service animals, and that we can use that same documentation so you can keep a pet in housing. The other thing is there are some housing, just like there are some hotels that allow pets. So you see what we're doing? We're building people's motivation for housing, and we're using the hotel as a leverage. So what else? Anything else why people would live in hotels? Does anybody ever say, I don't look homeless when I'm in a hotel? That's a big reason. Do you talk to people about how long they can stay in hotels or what the length of stay is in hotels and why the length of stay is like that? No? That's something we may want to talk to people about because we want to give people the impression that this is time that they can use to take the things that they want and get them in housing. Okay? So we want to talk about that. When we talk to people about hotels, what do we tell them the rules are? Okay. So what I would do is tell them the rules about when a lot of people are living together, which is true in apartment buildings, but it's also true in the hotels. It's also true in shelters. One of the first things that the rules are around is safety, right? It's safety around COVID, but it's also safety around other things because we want to identify that people feel safe in the hotels, that they feel comfortable in the hotels. And these are things that we want them to have with housing. So we want to start talking about sort of what the rules of tenancy are, but in relationship to the hotels. So would you say that hotels, go ahead. Anna, you wanted to say something? No? Okay. One of the things that we also want to talk about is how do they practice their housing skills? So this is a hard one. Would you say that hotels, and I'm talking about hotel management first, and then I'll talk about some of the teams or the residential staff in hotels. Would you say that the way that they enforce the rules mimics housing? Let me give you some examples. In housing, if you violate the lease, you get a notice. And then you get a chance to address the notice, right? So let's say you didn't pay rent. You can use the on-site team or you can use your path case manager to help you develop strategies so they can pay the rent so they're not in violation. I realize in hotels and also in shelters, they don't pay rent, but sometimes the behavior. So think about it. So do you have anybody who's bringing lots of people into their room? If you don't, I'm going to be pretty shocked.
We do.
Okay. So does the hotel object to that?
Absolutely. So does Friendship Service Center.
Okay. So what happens when people bring people into the building and into the hotel and have them staying there?
I'm not sure if they're staying there, but they get a warning and then they get asked to leave if they continue with the behavior of having the people in.
Okay. So the process is they get a warning and then they get a notice to vacate, right?
Yes.
Okay. So when they get a warning, does Friendship Service Center, does the service staff that's on site get a notice that they've gotten a warning?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So one of the things that we want to set up is just like we set up with landlords, that we find out if people are having problems in their housing. So one of the things that I would recommend is that you meet with them on a regular basis and that you let people know that they're getting a warning, but that the on-site team or the on-site residential staff, as well as their path case manager, is going to get a copy of that warning so they can work with them in order to address it, right? Which is really what should happen in housing. It happens in rapid rehousing and it happens in permanent supportive housing. So think about how you can set that up. One of the things that we recommend is in these shorter term programs is that you have some contact with the hotel staff about how certain people are, they go through the list about how everybody's doing, right? And you find out if there are any problems so you can address them early. Does that make sense? All right, think about for a minute what happens in a shelter if somebody's kicking up, right? Let's say in a shelter there's a curfew. So let's start with, why is there a curfew in shelters? Think about it. Why is there a curfew in shelters? If you were running a shelter, would you have a curfew? And why would you have it? I had a curfew, and the reason that I had a curfew in the shelter is I wanted to make sure that the people, unless people had a had to go out for some reason is that I knew who was in the beds. That was one thing. That's why I had a curfew. But the other reason was I want to make sure that people are safe, right? And that having people go in and out at all times of night was problematic. One of the reasons is when people went out and got high is they kicked up all sorts of hell when they came back to the shelter. So that it was a safety issue. So I explained the reason for the curfew, but if somebody violates the curfew reason, do they let you know in a shelter? Do they tell the path worker? Okay. What we want them to do is let us know if there are problems, because we want a chance to address those problems much like we'd address it in housing. So you see what the parallel process is here. We want to make sure that, first of all the rules are clear, that people understand the reason for the rules, which is slightly different in housing than if you just rented housing in the community. People don't usually explain to you why the rules are in the lease and what the reason for them is, but people have to understand that, and that they're uniformly enforced, and that there's a chance to address the issues, because that's what happens in housing, or should, right? So that's how the housing workers are trained, and we want to make sure that the tenants themselves who are going into housing understand this process. They always get a chance to address it, unless it's a violence issue, and that might mean a big problem, right? But they always get a chance to address it, and the workers are always there. So what you're doing is making a connection for them when they move into housing to the housing worker. Is this making any sense? We're also trying to help people practice their housing skills. So this is the biggest problem in housing, is people get into all sorts of trouble, particularly scatter site housing. The landlord doesn't tell anybody until he's had it, and then what he wants to do is evict somebody. We want to get a chance to address these issues early on. Does it always work? God, no, right? If it worked every time, we'd all be on Oprah, right? But one of the things that we want to do is set up this dynamic. Is this making sense? Both in shelters and in hotels. So that means that we have to meet with the hotel personnel, or the on-site team has to meet with the hotel personnel, and that we have to help them address the issues that are causing problems in hotels. Same thing for shelter. If it's precipitous, if somebody breaks a rule and the worker in the hotel says to them, do it again and you're out. That's a problem, because it doesn't teach anything, because one of the things that we're using these hotels, spending all these monies on hotels, is certainly depopulating the shelter so it's safe during COVID, but also we need to use this opportunity to prep people for housing. And one of the things that we're going to do when we prep people for housing is teach them how to use the on-site team. And part of that, or the transitional team, or the rapid rehousing team, or the scatter site team. And one of the ways that we do that is we help them follow the lease. Does this make sense? Everybody's silent. All right. Let's move to the next one and we'll come back to this one, okay? So let's talk about common lease rules, right? People have to pay rent. People don't pay rent in hotels. People don't pay rent in shelters. What are some ways that we can teach people rent payment? Savings is one of the ways that people do it. Buying things for their apartment, figuring out how to save up for things. We want to work with them with financial management so that they'll be able to pay rent. We want to talk to them about how much money they need and how they want to do it. Maintaining apartments, that can really be done in hotels, because you're going to see how people live. All right. So we heard a story about outreach one time, and it was actually in a warm area. It's actually in Hawaii. And somebody moved into their apartment, and within 2 hours, the whole apartment was filled up, so you couldn't even see their heads. Right. And so the worker in the housing calls the worker in outreach and says, yeah, Ask them to save a percentage of their income while in the shelters. That's a great one with rent payment. So one of the things that we want to do, right, when we're looking at hoarding, and why didn't the outreach worker know it? Because the person had things stashed everywhere. He was burying stuff in boxes, in those plastic boxes under trees, so nobody could see it.
Wow.
Okay, so the outreach worker really didn't know this person had all this stuff. We often hear somebody's in the shelter and they've got some stuff stored in somebody's garage or somebody's attic, and when they move into housing, they bring all this stuff in, or even a storage facility. What happens when people are in housing or in hotels? We're going to see if people are hoarding, right? And we're going to address those hoarding things. So the question I have for you is, who's going to address it? Is that part of the PATH program? Is that part of the residential staff? And then how are they going to address it? You can't just tell somebody stop hoarding, right? We're going to explain to them why the rule is there. And part of it is safety and fire safety. People have to be able to get out of the apartment if, God forbid, something happens. Another reason is bed bugs. Hoarding does not cause bed bugs, but it makes it almost impossible to get rid of. So it makes landlords crazy. We want to explain that, right? We want to explain, sanitary conditions. We want to explain all of these things. And these are the things that we're looking for. And what are we going to do about hoarding? We're going to help people organize their stuff. We're going to help them put it in containers. We're going to help people capitalize. We're going to help people do those things. But you got to decide, right? When people are in hotels, or even people are in shelters, or even if people are on the streets, how you're going to help people do that. And who's going to help people do that. Occupancy requirements we mentioned, right? Occupancy requirements are set. But you have people who are couples, right? And if you give them an apartment by themselves, they're probably going to move the other half of the couple in. So what are we going to talk to people about? About how they can share housing, how they can share a lease. What are the ways they can do that? What are the expectations? The difference is when you just move somebody in, they don't have to pay any rent. When you do it officially, they will have to pay rent and they'll be on the lease. We want to explain those things to people. Allowing their neighbors peaceful enjoyment. You get any complaints about people who are up all night in the hotels and keeping everybody else awake? Or this is my personal favorite, knocking on everybody's door to get a cigarette? Yeah, okay. So how do you deal with that? Is that residential staff or is that PATH staff? How do you divide those things up? Or is it both? It would be better if it was both. How do you deal with somebody about that? One is you develop empathy for the other people. They're waking people up. How's another way to get a cigarette in the middle of the night? Maybe they can figure out how to keep a couple of cigarettes, or maybe there's something there, right? Both team approach. Okay. We want to talk about how to teach this in the hotel environment. We want to also talk about how to teach this in a shelter environment, because some people are going back to shelters. So think about this for a minute. How do you teach these basic tenancy skills, and what are you doing now? So Hebe said that you have both teams that are approaching it. So you have good communication with the on-site team. It sounds like you probably have good communication with the hotel staff too. They're going to know that people are knocking on people's doors, right? So how do we do that? We also can do it, and hotels are perfect for this, but shelters are also. We can also do it by setting up a norm and everybody giving people the same message. And we can walk through a norm procedure if you want. So how do you teach it now? How do you teach these skills? Respecting your neighbors, not moving people in, maintaining a limit on visitors, maintaining the apartment. How do you do this now? Rent payment's a little harder, and we're going to talk about that. But some people talked about trying to get people to save a little bit every month, and that's a good thing. Have you not had anybody who hoarded in a hotel?
I didn't have that.
What? Has anybody had anybody who had trouble maintaining their hotel? Or a lot of you guys have 2 people in the hotel room. You've not gotten any complaints about this?
We had some situations, but we do once a week, I believe, Lisbeth, correct me, once a week we do room checks to make sure that everything is in the place that should be and reminding them constantly the rules.
Okay. So what you're doing is a norms training, and that basically you're giving people information about what the expectations are. Do you connect it with what's going to be expected in housing? Do you think that's something you can add to your, when you're talking to people about it? Are there going to be inspections in housing? Yes, there are.
Yes.
And also the case manager is going to be in people's houses. So they're going to see this, right? So that, do you talk to them about what the reason is? Health and safety, bringing vermin, that sort of thing. All right, let me give you an example. When we had people who moved in from the streets into housing, and some people moved in directly, right? Just like with you guys. We had a lot of people who kept food outside of the refrigerator. Stuff that should be refrigerated, right? And it created an awful smell. It brought vermin. I mean, things like tuna fish sandwiches in people's beds, that sort of stuff. People keeping meat outside the refrigerator. One guy kept meat in his bathtub. Is this a problem in housing?
Yes, that's a.
Yes, it's a big problem, right?
Oh.
So if people begin to do this in the hotels, what do? You do the room inspections. That's important. You talk to them about it. Do you tell them the reasons for this?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Has it been effective?
For some clients, but not all.
Okay. So one of the things we want to do is focus on it. And it sounds like both teams, the residential services and the PATH teams, are working on this, right? So everything's not going to work right away, but you want to give people a consistent message, right?
Yes.
You want to talk to them about what the problems are. You want to get everybody on board, right?
Yes.
You want to make sure that it's consistently enforced. So some sort of scheduled room inspections are a really good idea. You want to offer people alternatives, right? Do they have fridges in their hotel rooms? Yes, no?
Some of them do.
Okay. So we want to encourage the use of the fridge, right? We want to talk to them about, cause for alarm in this, but also disturbing their neighbors by having things rotting in the bathtub, right? And we want to keep giving people a consistent message, because one of the things they're going to need to do is do this in housing. They need to do it in hotels, but we need to teach them how to do that, and we need to make the connection to housing. So think through, and you don't have to say it, but just think through with each other how we reinforce these issues that are lease issues in hotels and also in shelters, right? We had lots of people storing food in shelters. And what happened? We had a big mouse infestation. But we need to teach people how to do that, how to safely store food, right? Do you guys have any money so you can give people things that they can put things in? We had a guy in housing who would not keep his food in the refrigerator. He believed the Freon would, he didn't know it was Freon, but he believed the chemicals in the refrigerator would poison his food. So we gave him plastic containers to put it in, and eventually it took a long time to get him to keep it cold, right? But one of the things that we did was we minimized the things that we were really concerned about, but I was still pretty concerned that he would poison himself, right? So that, we worked on it, but sometimes you got to take small steps, like a harm reduction approach. Does that make sense? but we want to teach people how to do that. So we're teaching them both expectations of housing, but also how to solve the problem, as well as the on-site team or the residential team in order to solve these problems, right? Because we're teaching somebody something when they're in the hotels. We're also teaching somebody something when they're in the shelters. You know, frankly, in these emergency housing situations, like they're not really housing, but the emergency shelter situations like hotels and shelters, we usually focus on just keeping the roof on the building, right? We keep on keeping the temperature low. We keep on, you know, trying to get people. But one of the things that we're missing an opportunity to teach people real housing skills, which will put them in better stead not to return to homelessness. Is this making sense?
Yes.
Okay. So, all right, let me see here.
I think something important you're saying, Andrea, too, is that when they're learning these skills, when they're learning the rules and making the connections, then they are really doing the work already that they do once they're housed, right? There's still, of course, always things to learn, but you can build upon their successes as well.
Absolutely. 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 And we're going to talk about that, about how to transfer these to housing, but it's really important. So, you know what? Maybe it's helpful if you guys talked about one of the things that they're doing in hotels is getting the documents they need for housing, which is absolutely processes that we want people to do. So in some places, in some shelters, I'm thinking about shelters in Cleveland that we're working with, the residential staff all have specialties. So not only are they responsible for keeping the building calm and functioning, but one of the residential staff is a specialist in benefits. One of the residential staff is a specialist in getting birth certificates, because that's been a huge thing. One of the residential staff is a specialist in employment, and that these specialties fold into the plan. So do you have anything like that in the shelters or in the hotels in Connecticut? Who works on these things? Is it just you guys that work on these things?
So this is Liz from Bethel. For our agency, that is something that's the case manager's responsibility. Residential counselors and staff, they don't specialize in any particular area. So that's not something, I mean, they possibly can assist, but that's not something they're charged with doing.
And is it because of the staffing? Is it because of their other responsibilities? Is that something you can talk to shelters about? You know, one of the things that we found in the shelter in Cleveland is that having people specialize and seeing progress with people kept the residential staff stable. In other words, the turnover liked it.
I mean, I can definitely bring this up to my supervisors. I think that's something that's actually a great idea, and it would make the case manager's job a little easier if we had people who specialized in certain tasks.
It would make the case manager's job a little easier, but it also provides people a bunch of different ways to work on this stuff. So what I hear from case managers, particularly PATH case managers, is sometimes the people are only around at night. Who's around at night? The residential staff. So if you have an evening staff who specializes in benefits, they can do that with people. The other thing is it makes the residential staff's job easier because people are focused and they're working on a plan. And when people are focused and working on a plan, they don't have a whole lot of time to get in a big trouble, right? So it also calms down the shelter or the hotel. So it's been beneficial to everybody. The other thing is, as I mentioned, the residential staff really likes this because they feel like they're experts. Oftentimes residential staff feels like they're overlooked by anybody else and that they don't have a real skill base. So it gives them a skill base. Some of the residential staff actually became case managers because they really liked this, right? But some of the residential staff just liked having the expertise and that they were reinforced for that expertise. So it's good for the staff, it's good for the people we serve, and it's definitely good for the case managers. So it's something you may want to think about, right? Because the point of this whole thing is we don't want to lose this time. And look, I ran a shelter and I just tried to keep the roof on it for the first 6 months we were there. And you know what? People weren't making a lot of progress and it just kept getting worse and worse. People were all over the place. Then we really structured it down and had people working with people on different tasks. And it made a big difference, not only to the people's ability to maintain housing and get in housing in a quicker way, which was definitely part of our plan, but it also made a difference to how the shelter functioned or how the hotel functioned. So one of the things is this is another way to get these buildings functioning in a better way, but also to help them maintain housing. So it's something to think about. The other thing that we found from rapid rehousing is it was less likely that people would only spend 6 months it was less likely people would end the rapid rehousing in 6 months it was important that people started the employment process before people moved into rapid rehousing. And a lot of people are going into rapid rehousing. There's a boatload of money in rapid rehousing right now. So a lot of people are going to try this, but if they start the job process before they move into housing, they were much more likely to be able to finish it in 6 months. But if they spend a couple of months, sort of getting to know the worker and settling into housing and then start their employment, then the employment, a lot of times people lose their jobs and stuff like that. So it was much more difficult to graduate people after 6 months. So you could also start it that somebody in the residential staff would work with employment for people who are targeted to rapid rehousing, though it's important for supportive housing too, but it's a way to start. Does this make sense? Is this something you can talk to your staff about?
Yes.
Okay. Do people see how it would be helpful? Okay. So let's go on to the next one. So one of the things that we want to do as path case managers is help people do the planning process. So the first part is to talk to people about housing options. And I know people feel like oftentimes people have only one option, but that's never true. There are always other options. It's not you take rapid rehousing and you go back to the street or you go back to the shelter. There are other options. People can increase their income and find some housing. They can try other things. They may be less likely than those, but we want to talk to people about what's available, what each person is eligible for, and what are their expectations of each option. So we want people to make an informed choice. We want to assess people's homeless and housing history. Why? Because it will repeat itself unless we address these issues. We want to talk about what their role is. We want to talk about what their responsibilities are. And most importantly, we want them to talk about what are the expectations of each option. You know, it drives me crazy when people say homelessness has no rules. That's really not true. Homelessness has a lot of rules, but they're different rules than in housing and in hotels. So we want to talk about it. So if people say, well, you know, homelessness has no rules, that's where you can't do certain things, right? So somebody's using drugs. How often? Ask them how often they use drugs in front of the police station. Probably not often, right? Why is that? Well, because there's a community rule around if you do it in front of a cop, you'll probably get arrested, right? Okay, so there are community rules you follow. Let's talk about those community rules. What about, you know, how do you get food? Well, I go to this soup kitchen and I go to this food pantry. Huh, are there certain times when you can go to the food pantry? Yes. Are there certain things you got to bring with you? Yes. Okay, so those are the rules around the food pantry. We want to point out the things that people have been able to do successfully and how they've been successfully able to follow rules. Basically, homelessness is a looser system than hotels and shelters and housing, but they are following some rules. So you want to point out how they've been able to follow those rules, how those worked out for them. You want them to tell you the story. And that's how we're going to get the success that's going to lead them to try other rules. So the difference between homelessness and housing is not that there are no rules and they're homeless, they're different rules. So we want people to get a chance to talk about that when we're starting the assessment. We also want people to talk about roles, right? So you guys work with encampments?
Andrea, I have a question.
Good, yes.
I have a client who, to the best of his ability, has been following all the rules, and he was hoteled and asked to leave because he didn't want to share a room with someone else. And now he is back on the street again. And this gentleman has done everything that was asked of him. And he just got angrier by the day. So now he's up for housing in Central, and he doesn't want to live in New Britain.
Okay.
And he is adamant that he doesn't want to live in New Britain. And although there are other housing prospects for him, his behaviors in housing will cause him to end up homeless again, I fear.
Okay. So this is a guy, right? Who,
Yes.
and we all know him in our life, who take the rules very literally and feel like they're following the rules and that they should be rewarded for that, right? Okay. So he feels like he's working a structure, right? And when it doesn't work, he's shocked and feels betrayed, right?
Absolutely.
So what are the rules around living in New Britain?
There are no rules. He's gonna get housed, and he has to work with a case manager.
Okay. He has to work with a case manager. Is the case manager willing to help him to identify housing options outside of New Britain?
Yes.
Okay. So you talk about that. So what did he do to make that possible? He talked about it. He talked about the reasons. He talked about his case manager, talked to his case manager about the reasons he doesn't want to live in New Britain. Did he talk to you about that?
Absolutely. He
Okay.
thinks that everyone is out to get him.
Okay. He's uncomfortable in New Britain, right? We don't want to reinforce the what may be psychotic and may not be. We don't want to reinforce that everybody's out to get him. But we want to reinforce that he's uncomfortable in New Britain and he feels like he would do better outside of New Britain, right?
Yes.
So we want to reframe it slightly and we want to talk to him about what the process is to apply to housing outside of New Britain. So is he eligible for a subsidy outside of New Britain? We want to make that clear, right?
Yes.
Is housing more expensive outside of New Britain? So we want to do a positive and negative thing. So he feels like he has some control. And also what we're giving him is a structure that he can work. He has identified that he can work a structure when he understands it. So we want to give him a structure that works. Okay.
Yes.
And then we want to, as we're moving towards housing, we want to give him scenarios so he can use this structure, right, to address his housing issues. So what do you think is going to be his issue in housing? Why do you think he's going to be kicked out?
Because he hoards.
Okay. Okay. So we want to talk about the hoarding, right? And we want to talk about the fact that this is clearly important to him. How long has he been a hoarder?
Well, he was housed in, I want to say, 2016, 2017. Lost his housing a year and a half later. Went back to homelessness. And he currently has 4 abandoned vehicles on the property of a church in New Britain. Full stop.
Okay. Okay. And does he want to bring those abandoned vehicles to his
Absolutely.
housing? Okay. So we want to do some things we want to talk about, that landlords are worried about their property and that this is going to be an issue, but clearly these cars are important to him, right? All right. So what are the other options? And you want to identify some options, right? You want to do a harm reduction plan around the cars, right? To get him housing. So one of the things is that what happened the last time is they told him to remove these cars, right? But he didn't bring those cars to the hotel parking lot, right?
You brought
Or
one of
did he?
them.
Okay, he brought one of them. So it might be possible to bring one of them, right? But it's not going to be possible to bring 4 of them. And this is what happened, right? Is that eventually he was evicted because of this reason. So can he keep them at the church?
No, the pastor, because they've been there over a year, and the pastor is going to have them towed. He gave him a date to have them removed.
Okay. Okay. All right. These cars?
I don't think so.
Well, let's think about that, right? Could he donate the cars? Could he work with a local high school that fixes up cars? Lend some of his expertise. Let's figure out other ways that he can have these cars and that they mean something to him. We really want to know what they mean to him, right? But 4 cars is clearly not, and just like the pastor at the church, there comes an end to this. So what can we do in terms of long-term plans? So we want to be planning for some of these things, right? Is there any place that he could be housed that he could bring the cars?
Are you asking?
Yeah.
That's very unrealistic.
Well, but is it possible?
No.
Okay, right? So let me give you an example, right? We had a guy with a coyote. Okay. And the coyote meant a lot to him and he had to have it, right? So we eventually negotiated that he got a trailer, right? That was away from other people because coyotes, right? And the other thing was he got his coyotes shots. So that we also want to engage in the process and engage him in the process. Is there any place that would take the cars? Right? Yeah, it's unrealistic, but you may see that some place will take one car, some place will take another car. Is he working on these cars?
He is not. They are storage units to him.
Ah. So then we want to talk about how he can store the stuff that's in the cars safely. So what are the ways that he could store the stuff in the cars?
Unit 2.
Okay, but the storage unit costs money and that's going to be a problem with rent, right? Can he prioritize some of the stuff in the cars? Can we give him bins, right? You can have a lot of stuff in bins and landlords are less upset about that than if they're just all over the apartment. So is it possible to organize this stuff? Is it possible, right? Is there any place that might give him, you know, a storage unit for a time where he could sort it? I'm assuming he goes to his cars and he sorts the stuff, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we want to see what that means to him, right? It's actually kind of ingenious to have these abandoned cars full of stuff, right? Now he doesn't have to pay for a storage unit for that sort of stuff. So what other things can he do? We want to pay attention to what it means to him, right? And we want to do some harm reduction around that.
Well, he has these cars and he is paying for a storage unit.
I'm aware of that. We're going to get to the storage unit, right? Can he still pay rent even with the storage unit?
No, he has no income.
How's he pay for the storage unit?
He has nice friends.
Okay. Okay. We're going to work on income with him. And we're going to get the friends to try to, you know, give us a time for the storage unit. Kent could certainly deal with the cars because we know what's important to him. They're his storage unit, right? It sounds to me like the Friends are only going to pay for one storage unit. So you see how we're going to deal with this, right? So we're going to help people follow the rules, but we're going to also help people negotiate, right? So we're going to try a bunch of things, even though there's no place that's going to take all 4 cars jammed up with stuff, right? It's not about the cars, it's about the storage. We're going to try to do it. And as we are turned down from a bunch of landlords, then we're going to reframe and try something else. But if you just tell him no landlord's going to, right? We also want him to think about what he uses it for. And I would call them the mobile storage units. Well, not so mobile.
Right.
Right? The car storage units. Okay. So this is important to him, and remind him that he's still got his other storage unit. And if he can still keep working his friends to keep that storage unit, that's great. But it also gives him another reason to increase his income. Is this making sense?
Yeah.
This is a negotiating phase. Before people move into housing, we got to do a negotiating phase, and people have got to realize their reasons, and they've got to be able to use their own strengths. And this guy's got a lot of strengths. So we're going to identify what's important to them, and we're going to begin a plan. So let's go to the next one. There we go. So as we give them the plan, we're going to limit the areas of intervention. We're going to focus on the most pressing needs that impact stability, which is a good example of this, right? We're going to relate all information to long-term goals, which in this case is housing for the people in hotels and shelter. We're going to remember that this is not a linear process, right? If it was a linear process, why would they need us? So people are going to take steps back. And we're going to help people move away from crisis-driven lives, meaning we're going to help people be more planful. And we're going to own impacting their issues about getting into housing. Okay. So let's go to the next one. This is a sum up slide. So we're going to educate on options. We're going to identify goals and preferences, which is really important. We're going to assess what their community living situation is. And this guy's got a whole system about how he lives homeless, right? He's got these storage unit cars. He's got the storage unit. He's got a bunch of things. He's able to manage, or was able to manage for the time being in the hotels, but he didn't understand why, if he followed the basic rules in hotels, he couldn't stay there. And part of the reason was that the hoarding wasn't addressed. And that's something that people can't do in hotels. And that we've got to address those issues. And it's right that you're thinking that this is going to be a problem long-term. But you know what else? This really means something to people, and particularly homeless people, the stuff that they gather, right? It may be they're feeling that's the only thing they have. Somebody once told me, you know, people will run into a burning building to save their possessions. And sometimes you can't figure out why they saved what they saved, or they risked their lives. Homeless people do the same things. They obviously mean something to them. And we want to help people make a plan and a structure that fits into where they're going so that they can address these issues. We're going to gather documents for the, yep, go ahead. Okay, so check your microphone. You sound like you're underwater. I can't hear what you're saying. Who was that? Can you put it in the chat box?
I think it may have been background noise from me. I'm turning my mic off.
Okay. We want to gather documents for the application. We want to connect people to resources that support their housing, and that includes the future case management that they'll get in housing, the rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. And we want to develop a stabilization plan for the future. So eventually, as people move out of hotels and shelters into housing, we wanted to identify a stabilization plan and what they're going to work on with the new worker. Okay, let's go to the next one. We talked about coordinating with the hotel staff. We talked about coordinating with the residential staff. We're going to make sure that we have a connection with the on-site team. We're going to meet with the residents and team together. We're going to teach them how to use the on-site residential team because that's going to be important, making that connection in housing. We're going to identify tasks and role for each services. And we talked about assigning the staff to specialty services. And that's something I would definitely talk to your agencies about. Okay, let's go to the next one. We're also going to do something very important, which is we're going to build skills. So we're going to always educate people on tenancy rights and responsibilities. I know they're not living in housing, but we're going to educate them because that's always the goal. We're going to model for them how to negotiate for services. We're going to try it out and we're going to debrief it. So the meetings that you have with the residential staff are going to put a framework around how they're going to move forward. We're going to establish regular check-ins as they try it out. And as they try it out, the most important thing is to debrief. When you meet with them and a service provider, you're going to debrief after that. When they try it themselves, you're going to debrief after that. And you're going to always highlight skills and things they can do more of. This guy doesn't know how to get what he wants. He feels like everybody is against him, and he's really trying desperately to work a system that he doesn't understand. So we want to talk to him about what he's doing that's positive and effective, and we want to talk to him about how to modify other behavior that might be less effective. We're going to really help people do some critical thinking. We're going to recognize strong partners. We're going to teach people how to do that, and we're going to renegotiate relationships if necessary. So that's how we get people through this being thrown out of hotels. I want to, Shannon, if we can pull up one of the things that I gave you, we're going to talk about changing expectations, but let's talk about that sheet that we gave you about preference sheets. Can you pull that up? I'm sorry to do this. I know it's hard on this thing. Everybody's got the preference sheet?
I'm going to try. Yeah.
Did I put it in here? Sometimes
It is in the chat box, so people can pull it up that way, but I'll try to show it here.
Okay. Good.
You see that? Yep.
Okay. So can you make it a little bigger or wider?
Is that better?
No.
Okay, let me try again.
This is a sheet that teaches you how to negotiate preferences because we talked about that. Sorry, I should have. You got to hit enable editing and make it whole. And it goes through preferences. Somebody mentioned that's not realistic. Not all of these are going to be realistic, but it talks about where they are now. It talks about this is what I would love. And then it talks about what's negotiable and non-negotiable, what I would accept and what other people would accept. So I'll only accept outside New Britain, now in New Britain. What I would accept and what I would not accept, I will not accept in New Britain. Okay, so that's maybe non-negotiable. But I really want a house, but I know I might not get a house. So that's negotiable, but that's a priority for me. This is what I want, what kind of housing, this is what access to transportation. It gets people to write down things they want, and we want to coach this but we want to figure out what your priorities are. So this teaches you how to negotiate. Does this make sense? Have you tried this with somebody? You think this would help?
Yes. Yes,
It
it
gives
does.
people more control. All right, you guys are welcome to use this any way you want. You can modify them. You can just download it and modify them. If there are other options that people need to identify, that's fine. Just add them. Okay, but it's really important to talk to people about where they are now, what their dream is, and what they would accept. Right? And then you can talk to people when they're looking at apartments. This one has 3 of your primary goals, but and 2 of the things that you sort of wanted, but you weren't a priority. This one has 4 of your primary goals, but you know what? It has it has nothing that's not your priority. What do you think? It helps people, gives people a structure to make these decisions. You're welcome to use it.
Thank you.
Of course. All right, let's go to the next one. Sorry, I'm moving a little fast because let's go to changing expectations. Can we do that, Shannon? One of the things we want to do is use this period of time in the hotels or even in the shelters to change people's expectations. It's 1 up. Go 1 up.
More.
Nope.
No.
Up. There you go.
Okay.
To change people's expectations. We're going to teach people planning skills. We're going to teach people not to be so reactive. We're going to teach them critical thinking skills. We're going to take the time to identify the strategies and resources that have worked for them and how they can apply them to the new thing. And we're going to get people to identify more than one resource. A lot of times with homeless people, they've been in crisis their whole lives. So when you're in crisis, you think about what'll get you out of crisis, right? And then you jump for that option. And that oftentimes makes people like the guy, right? They won't take my car here. Well, there are other options. Let's think about the other options. So we're teaching those options the whole time we're talking to people. We're also helping people identify things that they can do every day. We're giving them a structure to their days because that's a really important thing in moving from homelessness to housing, because in housing, you don't have a lot of structured time. In hotels, you don't have a lot of structured time. When you're homeless, you have a lot of structured time. Even though people don't think that's true, they have to keep their stuff dry. They've got to figure out how to store their stuff. They've got to figure out how to feed themselves. They've got to figure out all those things. And those provide a structure to their lives. When they move into housing, or even if they move into hotels, they don't have that structure. So let's help people figure out a structure and purpose to their days. And that structure and purpose helps people organize, and organizing means they're more likely to maintain housing. We're also going to help people take on new roles as a hotel resident, as a shelter resident, but homelessness to tenant. We're going to help them take on roles that they had before. How can they reunite with their family or become a family member or contribute to their family? Maybe they're a student, maybe they're a worker, maybe they advocate for other people, maybe they're an artist. That also adds structure to their day. So we're going to change the expectations, and we're going to help support roles in people's lives and help people develop structure and purpose. Okay, let's go to the next one. We're also going to help people develop their network of care. And these are more sophisticated things that the case managers can do. We're going to have residential staff do some of the other stuff, so the case managers have more time for this. We're going to help people and do some skill building around working with community resources and identifying how they can find somebody to help them with things. So if the landlord gives them a notice, the only option is not to move out. It may be to call a lawyer. It may be to call. So we're going to help them develop a network of care that works for them and that they can use to get help in things. It also connects them with a future worker. Sometimes these resources are hard to negotiate, and do not hesitate to get the senior staff in your agency to negotiate some of these things. There's some resources that your clients really need, which are just not available to you. Tried a million things to get the resource to respond. Talk to the senior staff and see if they can help you get that resource to respond, or identify another resource that will do the same thing. Okay, let's go to the next one. So what do you think about this in hotels? It's a different structure, right? What do you think about implementing some of this in your practice? Is it a different case management role? You guys are doing a lot of this, but it structures your role so we can structure the clients. What do you think about it? Anybody? All right, let's try the next discussion. It's a little more targeted. Go ahead. So what do you see as the gaps? What do you see as community resources that are available that can help you? And you should include the hotel staff and the residential staff. How comfortable are these staff in talking housing and connecting to resources? How comfortable are you? It's a different way to approach it, but it's just a small click on the dial in what you're already doing. What do you think?
Hello.
Right.
Are
Tell you
there
what.
gaps? I mean, I feel like there's always going to be gaps or issues, whether it comes along with documentation, paperwork. I think there's always going to be gaps and issues, but there's ways we can work around it and figure out how we can make things work. In the meantime, there's always tons of available resources in the community. We have tons of resources. We have a source specialist that can help clients ready to do Social Security. So we have those resources available to all the clients who need it or who qualify for it, or we can find out if they are qualified for it.
Right.
And
so go ahead.
And
Go ahead.
like for staff, and I mean, I think at this point, we should be sort of comfortable with housing. And if not, we can find tons of resources within our agency and in our community that can help us with the housing for clients. And we have landlords that we work with at Friendship Service directly in New Britain, and outreach workers, case managers have built good relationships that help us, like with even our toughest clients with backgrounds, that will still house our clientele. So it's just about building the relationships.
Okay. So I think that's great that you guys have a network of care that you can pull on in order to do it. It's all about structuring the network of care, but it's all about, here's an interesting thing, and you made me think about this. Our job of path workers is not just to link people with a housing and get them housed, it's to help them maintain housing. And I think this discussion is really focused on the maintaining housing part. We can certainly talk how to, negotiate with landlords and stuff like that, but it sounds like you've got that covered. But this is really added structure that helps people maintain housing and helps them use those resources even after they're out of the PATH program.
Yes.
So that you've got an excellent base, but we want to make sure that people know how to use those resources, right? Because they're not going to be immediately available. Shelters and hotels, the resources are right there with them. In housing, there may be a visiting case manager, but we want them not to make the case manager the focus of their life. And we want to teach them how to use those resources fairly independently. So that's the transition, but it sounds like you've got a great base. That's great. Anybody else? What do you think? Does this make sense to people? All right. So the next session, and when we do for the individual sessions, we're going to be talking to people about if any of these things are able to be put in place and what's the priority here. So we'll follow up on this. Do people have any comments, questions? There's a survey in the, so we want people to fill out the survey. And if you have anything else you want training on, or that is more helpful this way, let me know. I think that also will send you out a list of everybody who participated so you can get in touch with other people who may have ideas, because that's a big part of this. If you could complete the survey, that would be great. So we're going to wind it up. Want to say goodbye? Turn on your cameras. Want to see your faces? You have a camera. But most importantly, I want you guys to be able to see each other. Because the truth is we're all doing the same thing, and it's helpful sometimes to see each other and to be able to connect.
Where's my camera?
The camera should be, I don't know, for me, it's at the bottom of the screen.
Bottom left for me.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Have a good day.
Have a
You
great
too.
day.
It's always a pleasure to be able to see you guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. See ya.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
We'll see.